question of why is it so difficult to secure health technologies? And just some quick formalities before we kick off this event. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the Wurundjeri and Barunga people of the land on which we are meeting. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and the Aboriginal elders of the other communities who may be here today. All right, so the format of the event will be Dr. Greg Adamson will speak for will be first to speak for approximately 30 minutes. Of that will be split between Dr. Greg Adamson talking, and there'll be a question and answering time towards the end. It's important that you post your questions in the chat, and that'll be easier for Dr. Greg Adamson to actually answer or take the questions that he feels are relevant. And the same with George Silveri, who will also speak. He's from the AI in healthcare, and Dr. Greg Adamson is from IEEE chapter. A little bit about background about Dr. Greg Adamson. He has worked in cybersecurity with a focus on health since the late 90s. He has tertiary qualifications in engineering, computer science, internet studies, and law. He currently chairs the IEEE Standards Association Industry Connection Program, Meta Issues in Cybersecurity, looking at more effective ways to address cybersecurity. And on that note, I introduce Dr. Greg Adamson as our first speaker today.
Great, thanks. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Can you see that? Great.
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, so this is a discussion about cybersecurity and health, but it's primarily a discussion. I primarily start off by talking about cybersecurity in general. Then I talk about some particular areas of health security, and then I'll talk about an IEEE initiative in relation to improving health security. And and one other role that I wear, one other hat that I wear is I'm the technical vice president for the IEEE Social Implications of Technology Society, SSIT. So cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a very fashionable topic these days, but it has been around for a long time. I got involved in the early 90s when I set up the cybersecurity practice at the Australian Quarantine and Inspection Service. And perhaps coincidentally, I've just finished a stint with the COVID Quarantine Victoria, where I also established a cybersecurity practice. So it's an area that's had attention for a while, but it's certainly an area that's of growing importance. Unfortunately, the cybersecurity effort is failing. I don't want to put too strong a point on it, but health is a very good example over the last 5 years. Each year, year on year, we've seen a deterioration in the effectiveness of cybersecurity, particularly around ransomware, as measured by the number of successful attacks, the impact on the industry, the impact on end individuals, and by just about any other metric you can imagine. So that's sort of part of my punchline, but I will start off on a more positive note. So cybersecurity traditionally is considered to be the protection of immediate, practical, and ongoing technology elements. Traditional cybersecurity is concerned with confidentiality, integrity, and availability of what are called information assets. It adopts the military metaphor of attack and defense, of battles begun and concluded, of protected spaces. More or less, you can think of traditional cybersecurity as the moat around the castle, which is the defended territory. However, just as cyberspace is more than the sum of disk drives and optic fibers, cybersecurity is more than the sum of access controls and firewalls. And terms that have become very widespread recently, such as zero trust and zero-day attack, illustrate the breakdown of traditional military metaphors. And I will say, amongst other things, that I strongly admire the work done by the US Department of Defense in making clear the limitations of the traditional metaphor. So how do we think? How do we approach that? How do we think differently about cybersecurity? In contrast to the battle metaphor, cyber attacks, I find it more useful to compare cyber attacks to pollution of our air. They're ever present. They require measures to address appropriate measures as needed. And in particular, I think it's useful to look at the protection of cyberspace as the task of cybersecurity, and the idea that to protect any of cyberspace, we need to protect all of cyberspace. And here a metaphor taken from healthcare is important. The idea that if we want to address a pandemic such as COVID, we need to address it all around the world. If we don't address it all around the world, then lo and behold, from some section of the world where it's not well addressed, new variations of COVID will suddenly arise or repeatedly arise. In this sense, cyber attack is an attack on all of cyberspace. And to use the famous John Donne quote, ask not for whom the bell tolls for thee. Every successful attack in cyberspace is an attack on your environment. So when we link that to IEEE's goal of advancing technology for humanity, we can see that what a potentially different approach to the traditional approach is to take a global approach to protection of cyberspace. Narrow, locally resource-intensive attempts to establish cybersecurity are likely to fail, resulting in less effective cybersecurity with each passing year. And lo and behold, that's what we're seeing. Here are some examples of cybersecurity mismatch. Security features that are added at the end of the product development lifecycle. A serious commentator in the early 1960s, Paul Barron, pointed out that was wrong, and it's a lesson we have not yet learnt. Product developers don't pay for poor security. You produce rubbish, you don't get punished. You don't get punished in the market, you don't get punished in the courts. That's sad. Almost all crime has a cyber aspect, and yet 95% of police globally lack cybersecurity training. Telling people that they are at threat from cyber attack does not change their behavior, and therefore it doesn't protect them. Most cybersecurity awareness campaigns fail, and nobody bothers to measure whether or not they succeed or not. Security certification companies focus on certifications sold, the number of people with their certificate, not on overall effectiveness of cybersecurity. Most cybersecurity research is focused on solving partial problems. So right across at universities across the world, we see very smart people looking at small parts of the problem and not essentially improving the overall state of cyber protection. And that's all a bit sad. Now, if we look at health technology challenges in particular, and I've just listed a few of these, we have the rise of ransomware that has occurred since 2016, and I referred to this before. There was a particular case there that I thought was very informative, and that was a discussion, an investigation by the National Health Service in the UK of what actually went wrong during an attack in 2016, which was predicted, announced, and known. And what happened was that the NHS Digital issued warnings several weeks before the ransomware attacks, saying these ransomware attacks are about to arrive. You need to update your systems. And the answer they got back from hospitals and health centers was, you've just told us that the operating system of our MRI is about to be compromised. Sorry, We can't do anything about that. So the fact that the MRI happened to be based on NT was a useless piece of warning, because there was no way to extricate the operating system from the MRI, a multi-million-dollar MRI. It was just useless information. It didn't give them any capacity to prepare. Now, the combat within health, that was the first point. Within health, we see the combination of information technology and operational technology. This is very important because I referred to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That does not meet the cybersecurity needs of operational technology. That's sad and unfortunate, but true. So with operational technology, for example, an implantable device in your body, in addition to confidentiality and integrity and availability, you also have to consider the ability to attack and destroy the device. This was first seen in the Stuxnet attack and is something that we have not yet learned from within the cybersecurity arena. A third point, the assumption that good security is reserved for those with the most money. Now, this is an interesting assumption, which is often it's not stated so clearly as that. The way it's stated is, if you find it in, for example, the maturity models. If you want a high level of maturity, these are the things you should do. Anyone who's worked in cybersecurity will be familiar with maturity models. However, this ignores the fact that in order to do all of those things, you need immense resources. That's what's implied. And therefore, it's okay for a bank to aspire to a high level of maturity because a bank has money. It's useless for a hospital to aspire to the same level of maturity because they don't have the same amount of money. So what our current cybersecurity models tell us are, if you're a bank, you deserve good security. If you're not a bank, you don't. Or if you're a hospital, you don't. And that is completely unacceptable. But it is the underlying assumption to all statements about cybersecurity maturity. A couple of other points: the special treatment of health data, the increasing complexity of health technology, including the use of AI systems, and that's my reference to AI in my presentation, and the importance humans place on our health. Looking at IEEE, can we help to make this dire situation better? And this is an aspirational statement. I just want to make a couple of comments about this, and this will, I'll finish on these points, and then hopefully we'll get some useful discussion. So IEEE provides a technically, politically, and culturally neutral platform for this global problem. When I say platform, I mean platform it could be a platform in the sense of developing standards. It could be a platform in the sense of drawing on the expertise of technologists, engineers, and others. So we provide this neutral platform, and we represent hundreds of thousands of technology professionals, something like 400,000 technology professionals and students aspiring to be technology professionals. We recognize that cybersecurity practice is becoming progressively less effective. We're focused on outcomes. We're not focused on effort. So the fact that there's growing compliance with security certifications at the same time as worsening cybersecurity attacks is not a cause for celebration. I won't name any particular standards, but if you can think of a widespread standard for addressing cybersecurity, you can probably match the growth of that standard adoption to the increase in successful cybersecurity attacks. So that's a problem. IEEE Standards Association already provides standards that benefit billions of people every day through, say, the use of Wi-Fi and local area network, which are IEEE standards. And IEEE has a wealth of experience and activities in cybersecurity. IEEE's meta issues in cybersecurity comes out of that. We're looking at a multidisciplinary initiative to attempt to address these big questions. And we pick up some of those observations I made earlier on, such as the poor alignment between commercial and regulatory motivation and the security of products, the failure of the competitive approach to achieving cybersecurity, and the point I made about banks getting good security and not hospitals. We're engaging technologists in industry, research and government, social scientists, legal scholars, policymakers, economists, and others in creating this approach, this meta issues to cybersecurity approach. And I'll just show a slide there on how you can either search for IEEE meta issues in cybersecurity, or there's a link there, and I'll encourage the organisers to make these slides available. So that's my presentation, and I'd be very interested in any discussion on any of those points there.
Thank you, Greg. The panel is the discussion panel today is a little bit quiet, so I'm happy to open the floor. There's a number of members who have joined. I'm happy to open the floor and just unmute and let people go that way, and hopefully we can coordinate it without too much confusion. So the floor is open for any questions to Dr. Greg Adamson. He made some extraordinary statements. I want to pick him up on the bank one, but I'd like to open the floor to everyone and have a go first.
If I didn't upset you, I haven't achieved my goal.
Greg, it's Paul here. Thanks very much for your presentation. One of the things you mentioned was around the use of NT for MRI scanners. And the other George Silviera and myself are very familiar with some of those complexities of legacy, sometimes called heritage systems and so on. So I guess my question is there light at the end of the tunnel? Are there ways forward from a standards kind of perspective to make this whole transitioning out from systems that are just always more compromised than we would like? Can standards actually help us in this space?
Yeah, so I think I'm very interested in the IoT discussion in relation to that question. So I've worked with, I originally set up the cybersecurity environment for Medibank Private in 99, 2000. And that was, that's when I got heavily involved in health informatics. I probably should also mention that I'm a fellow of the Australasian Institute of Digital Health as well. So I sort of do a reasonable amount in this space. And for me, IoT is like a little bit of a microcosm of what could go wrong or what could go right. So IoT, for people who are familiar with, I mean, like everyone's familiar with IoT. For people who've looked at the security of IoT, it's a bit of it has been considered a bit of a basket case. So nobody logs onto their refrigerator IoT and changes the password. Nobody in the world updates their refrigerator's IoT when there's a new version of the firmware. Nobody even has a clue where to find that information. And I'm saying refrigerator because probably if you've ever bought a refrigerator in the last few years, it could be a smart device. As soon as people say smart devices, you know they're talking about vulnerable devices. So any device you have that's smart has some sort of IoT in it, and that means it's vulnerable, and probably means that there's a whole bunch of stuff that should be done. So that's sort of and if you look at the distributed denial of service attacks, where hackers will be able to take over 160,000 or maybe in the future millions of compromised devices and use them to launch attacks on websites that they want to attack for some reason, and that's sort of been where IoT is in the past. And now people are looking at what methods could we potentially use to protect IoT devices. And there was a great metaphor I had. So supposing you're a little IoT device and there's a supercomputer trying to attacking you and trying to compromise you, what chance do you have? And the metaphor that was the example that was given to me was, well, you know, if I'm one person and I'm trying to cope with a school bully, what do? I get a bunch of friends together and say, you know, if you punch me, I'll bring my friends and they'll punch you. So is it possible? What are the mechanisms by which we can create networks of trust among IoT devices so that an individual IoT device doesn't need the processing power to handle, well, the physical power, the electrical power, because it's probably running on a battery, that means it's got to last for years, so tiny amount of power, and then a tiny amount of processing power, because processing power takes power. And so if I could make sure that my personal area network, within my personal area network, all the devices in my personal area network, it's not just that somebody's going to attack my pacemaker, but somebody will have to, there'll be a capacity through my personal area network, and even extending beyond that to my home area network and so forth, for me to draw together resources which can identify when an attack is being launched and which can actually do something about that attack. And there's some good work happening at the University of Melbourne on this at the moment. And other places as well. So I would say, in answer to your question, I think there are some positive hopes. But in order to do that, standards have a very important role to play. Because if you're going to get all of your devices to gang up and protect you, then all of those devices need to speak a bit of a common language, and we're talking standards there. So I'm currently doing doing an assessment of IEEE's cybersecurity assets. I'm putting together a report on that for the Standards Association, and we've got lots and lots of great work has been done, but we haven't really pulled it together. I'm trying to pull that together and work out the opportunity, following on from the meta issues in cybersecurity that I spoke about, to provide that. And it's not just IEEE. IEEE collaborates with Standards Australia. It has lots of agreements with ISO, IEC, and others. So there's opportunity for collaboration there. But I would say I see more of a light. I'm more optimistic now than I was a couple of months ago before I started this work.
It's good to know, Greg. And excuse me, George Shafik, I just saw that my industry colleague, John Patrick, has also posted a question in the chat that might be directed as well.
I
don't know, John, if you want to unmute and just...
If I may. Hi, Greg. Thanks very much for your commentary. You know, everything's in my chat there. We're an SME, so we don't have a lot of resources to do many different things. Our software is installed inside the hospital data center, and therefore it's inside their firewalls. Should we be doing more? We rely on them to protect us. Should we be doing more ourselves? And what might it be if we should?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I've been looking at exactly this question from a few different in a few different ways over the last couple of years. I work with a startup called Medikey, trying to understand what's happening there. And I think the environment that you describe is obviously heavily influenced by federal legislation, regulation, and initiatives at the moment. So, for example, the goal of eliminating paper by 2022, which is very soon. Eliminating paper.
There's another fantasy.
Well, that's more than 4 weeks away. So yeah,
well, we've still got time.
we've still got time. Yeah. So looking at and I don't want to be. I'm definitely not critical of federal government initiatives. The the aspirations are very good. The questions, the aspirations are good. Some of the challenges are very interesting, such as does consumer data right have any meaning in the health sector? Because that's sort of like been in the too hard basket for a while, even though CDR's been around for 7 years. It's still the eliminate paper in health relates to organization to organization, not organization to individual. There's still that idea that you're going to be giving people a paper script. Well, there's a bit of work around scripts. There's a little bit of work around prescriptions, but the digital COVID certificate discussions have sort of raised that, and there's been a lot of work there, even if they constantly manage to demand that people reveal more data than is actually required under the privacy principles. So there's a whole lot of pieces. I would say if you're as an SME providing a service which sits within a context, you need to work out your view of your own security exposure. You must work that out, because at the end of the day, if you don't want to be roadkill. If somebody comes along and hacks the hospital and holds everything to ransom, and just happens to hold your records to ransom, or publishes your records to beat up your hospital, you want, and this, you can't spend a lot of time on this as an SME. You can't spend a lot of time on it, but you need to think. You need to have thought about it. You need to have done a risk assessment. You need to have risk managed your approach. You need to have had a risk workshop where you sit down with your your company sits down and says, what are our data assets? What are our information assets? What happens if? Do a little bit of scenario discussions, so that you're not, if something goes badly wrong, at least you've talked through how you're going to handle it from a company point of view. You can't just say, well, that if that all goes wrong, it's out of our control. You need to have thought, what happens if somebody publishes all of your information on the World Wide Web?
So, Greg, are they the two biggest risks? That's either one is they publish the information we have in the records, and the other is that they encrypt it so we can't read it. Are they their two biggest risks?
So those are, I wouldn't actually call those risks. I would call those events. Your risk is that your reputation is going to get trashed. That's your biggest risk, and nobody's going to buy your product anymore. That is your risk. And that risk could be something as simple as, so when you say protected by their firewall, they would be, you're talking here legacy systems. If they really protect that stuff in a data center with a firewall, that's ancient history. And if they're still doing it now, they won't be doing it in a couple of years. More likely, they're trusting cloud services, and cloud services isn't about protection by firewalls anymore.
I don't wish to put the finger on any of our clients as having antiquated technology, but across the industry, there are different levels of progression into cloud services, and some are there and some aren't there.
Yeah, and what I would suggest is that it's not even about how progressive the organization is. It's about what opportunities the organization has decided to adopt to save money over the last few years. And if they haven't decided to go cloud, there are vendors beating on their doors saying, this is going to be so easy for you. You're going to be able to integrate. You've got 5 sites. You're suddenly going to be able to integrate those 5 sites when you adopt our cloud version, because you've been using our standalone version for so long, and this is going to give you so much more functionality.
Yep.
And I don't know if you can recognize who I'm talking about, but that's a marketing spiel from a very significant organisation right at the moment.
Yes, of course.
I apologise, folks. I've got to intervene because
Yep.
we're eating into George's speaking
I
time.
apologise. Apologise.
That's okay. No, we could talk about this for days. Yeah, I've got 10 questions in my head, but we need to go on to our next speaker, and certainly we can open up the panel after the time, and people can hang around, and if you guys are available, that'll be awesome. So I'll now introduce George Silveri. Introduction: AI in health care. Was the chair of the Victorian Health Sector CIO Cybersecurity Working Group within the Department of Health, and deputy chair for the CIO ICT Operations and Assurance Working Group, supporting government initiatives to define standards and programs to improve technology and cybersecurity maturity across the public health sector. And with that in mind, the chair is the speaking panel. It's over to you, George. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George, and everyone. So, Greg, a very good presentation. So very informative. And John, great question around pretty much it's should I be looking forward and expanding my my risk assessment activities or not? And I think the answer is yes, but it's all about balance. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. It's about finding the right balance between security, usability, and innovation moving forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk here. And my presentation is fairly simple. It's really focused around information security and digital innovation in healthcare, and especially around how do you implement those things into strategic work streams. So I'm just going back a little bit here on obviously information security, and you probably all have heard all of this. So before 2017, when we had obviously that very big incident at the NHS, so there was a lot of information security was around for a long time, and Greg mentioned that for many years, but it was not like a focus for a lot of organizations in healthcare. So healthcare usually just keeping the lights on and moving forward as nothing's going to happen to us. There wasn't even a topic of conversation. We knew that security needs to be done. Some of the things were done. Yes, we have passwords for everybody, so it's safe. We have a firewall, but to the extent of the security that we applied to our organizations was not mature. So our thinking was starting to mature before 2017. But the level of maturity that we had in our own thinking was very low. So as I wrote in the slide there, it's like not in the far distance past information security. Try to talk to many CEOs or executives about that before 2017 when I cry. And you're lucky if you get more than 5 minutes of their attention. And that, at least that's what I experienced myself and a lot of my colleagues. But then 2017 came, and it was amazing. I still remember the phone call that I got and saying, well, you see what's happening in NHS. And I said, well, let me follow up. And I'd start following the news. And it was quite amazing. It was like, well, we all predicted that would happen one day. And then someone would only take someone to kickstart that process and kickstart all these activities and empower other people and criminals and other people to think and practice their malevolent beliefs against the good people, and would also instigate the good people to implement and develop solutions to be able to protect us. So but the question at that time was like, do we do anything about it? Oh, yes, of course we should do. Yeah, I think we should. Should we not? Oh, we're never going to be affected. We're never going to be hacked. Who cares about information, healthcare information? And that was a statement that I heard from not only one, but various CIOs saying, well, who cares about healthcare information? And I said, it's not about the healthcare information. It's about the value and what it means, what it can be. So we'll talk a little bit more in the later slides. But today, I did notice that there's a massive uplift in awareness, at least in the public sector. And now I'm working in the private sector. I can say that there's a very strong focus on that. But but there has been a massive uplift in awareness in healthcare compared to what it was before. Is that perfect? No, obviously not. But it's better every day, and it's better than yesterday, and it's better than last week. And as the funding models evolve and our understanding of the threats and what we actually need to protect, our focus is sharpened as we go. So is information security in healthcare that different? Well, if you think about, for example, all of those 7 sort of elements that I have listed there. So you have a client, for example, patient or customer, however we call it, the people that requires healthcare services. Then you have a problem. So most of the time, or you suspect of have a problem, like healthcare problem. Then you go into an investigation, which is usually have a medical practitioner that will do some sort of investigation, perform some testing and come up with the diagnosis and give you some medication, monitor you, and then discharge you, expecting that you're going to have a happy life and healthy life moving forward. So in that context, it's quite structured what we do. So we could predict what sort of information we'll be collecting and what sort of a security measures we would have in each of those stages. However, it's not easy because healthcare, it's usually a combination of different technologies and applications that are used to deliver care. So we have multiple vendors, multiple applications, multiple specialties, especially in acute systems, not specialist boutique healthcare organizations. You have a range of challenges to deal with in various different disciplines like cardiology, fertility, and so on. So is security in healthcare that different? And I just put roughly here, some commentaries. This is my personal view on health information. And I think there's a lot of a misunderstanding out there. So what technical health information is and what health information can be and what it means to people. They're different things and there are different interpretations for everyone. So but what can health information really be is basically what I have just mentioned. Health information can be more than just normal information. It's information in steroids. It's information that provides more detail about an individual that you can possibly have. It's very sensitive, very private, very confidential to many individuals, to actually most individuals that an organization can hold of them. So it's your first name, it's your date of birth, it's your address, it's your previous clinical history, it's your next of kin, it might be your credit card number if you're paying for a particular service. It may be a number of things, but it also can be your pathology, your imaging results, your genetic buildup, your DNA sequencing. It can be a number of things that will pretty much bring that information to the information on steroids, as I tell people. So it's enriched and it's very powerful because it's not just a matter of knowing who you are, your date of birth. It's actually no details about you. It's knowing details that can be used to not only impersonate you, but take advantage and blackmail you if you're a person, a subject of interest. Clear example is what happened in one of the Asian countries a few years ago. I'm not mentioning names here today, but was a group of attackers seeking to find information about a particular individual. And that's where healthcare information is important. And it's important for them to use as a blackmailing tool, as an extortion mechanism. And it is important for them to announce that they have control over someone's information, private information, just put it that way. So the digital healthcare ecosystem, and how do we solve these things? And why do we get to a place where information security in healthcare is so complicated to address? As I mentioned before, we have multiple disciplines in healthcare. So let's say cardiologists, oncologists, etc. And it's multidisciplinary and quite detailed. So what does that mean? So it means that there's a lot of best of breed applications out there, new applications and older applications, legacy applications. And the question and the commentary that Paul Cooper mentioned before about MRIs and these legacy devices, and they are there for many reasons. It's one of the reasons that we hear a lot from our vendors that a particular device has been certified and has been tested, passed QA, quality assurance, based on a particular version of software, of their own software. So that software runs on most of the time, well, actually, if not 100% of the time, on a base operating system. And that operating system, it needs to be regularly patched, etc. But as you know, patching even normal computers today, you break things. So there was just a recent an example of a larger software provider that we all know, and we all probably experienced the use of their software, that they released an update that broke the installation package within the platform. And if that happens to normal devices, just put the way desktop, laptops, and all the devices running that particular operating system, imagine what the damage that can do on a life support system. So hence why the industry is cautious. And I understand from the vendor's perspective that it would take a little bit more time to protect and bring the level of compliance and diligence that we have and security to biomedical devices. But this is just how we operate. Can we be smarter? Absolutely. We can be smarter. We can try to simplify the process of certification, validation of that, and ensure that we're not causing any problems when we implementing patching, to ensure that the systems are protected at least to up to that point in time, etc. We also have various players and some standards in place. We got good standards in place. I mean, I won't say that they are bad at all. And every standard or framework is designed to try to solve a problem. And if one standard does not apply to a particular organization, I encourage people to have a look at multiple standards to see what suits them best. And people say, well, what do you know, and how do you know what standard or framework would suit me best? Well, you start thinking about what are the top 5 or 10 things that you need to protect. What are the top 5 or 10 things that will absolutely destroy your reputation as an organization, as an individual, as a professional? So, and I think we should start focusing on those things. And you notice that controls to be able to mitigate some of the risks may come from various sources. And what is practical and what fits within the budget. Not having a monstrous budget, it doesn't mean that you can't apply the principles and be diligent in how you implement your solutions. You should think implementing solutions, information security controls by design, opposed to I'll deal with that later. That later will cost you money and likely you're not going to be able to afford, or most will not be able to afford. But if you do by design, the conversation is a little different. It becomes part of the scope of a project, it becomes part of a strategy, and it becomes supported, and it be supported by the executive and your board. And you just have to be very honest about that, because if we leave information security for later, the amount of effort and cost and impact on the timeframes to implement any projects will be significantly affected. So moving, let's say, competitive. So we have a lot of vendors, a lot of software providers. They're very competitive. I can say they all have the best product in the world, and they all can solve all of your problems. And as a result of that, they are constantly looking for innovative ways of delivering the platform. And John, just to touch back around on on-premise versus on-cloud solutions. I mean, it is obviously cloud has a lot of benefits that you can scale up and manage that in a much better way than an on-premise solution, but it also attracts a significant amount of new things you need to think about, new risks. But those risks are not eliminated if they are on-premise. And as Greg mentioned before, is those two events that you mentioned as a consequence of a risk realizing. They are the things they need to think about. And it's not only from a competitive product advantage perspective, but also how your organization will sustain into the future. and be present. We've seen that being present and have supported a number of health services overcoming cyber attacks and recovery activities. And I can say, and I can tell for sure that if one health service or one healthcare organization that uses a particular software or piece of application gets compromised, and the investigations and the containment strategy is still on before a post-incident report is produced, there's a lot of assumptions. And the assumptions is the worst enemy of any commercial organization, because it can really drive you to extinction. So we've got to be very careful on that. Having a program in place where we're covering the basics, so the top 5 things that you want to protect, it takes the responsibilities, and the industry and the sector will appreciate your commitment towards that. So it's very important. With competition, what happens with competition a lot as well, as we progress, we thinking about the functional aspects of applications. So what does that mean? So people sell on functions delivered by an EMR, by whatever clinical application or applications they sell. The application can perform a task. This is a task ABC for you. It's going to be quicker. You can see this number of reports, etc. Fantastic. And this is going to can interconnect all of your clinics or your hospitals. And from the functional perspective and the clinical perspective, you lose at that and you go and look at that and you go, fantastic. So I have all of this integration, all of this connectivity, all of these tasks that can be collaborated amongst my hospitals, etc. But very few people look into, okay, tell me a little bit more about the architecture of your application or how you host this data. Do you host this data within the appropriate legal jurisdiction? And I'm talking about even within the country, say Australia, we have many local jurisdictions. In my current appointment, I have 9 different legal jurisdictions to take care in regards to healthcare information. So, and it's across 5 countries, like 9 legal jurisdictions. But we need to understand that. What is the architecture? Because some countries and some legal requirements across different continents, for example, GDPR and the Singapore, which is a very good act around protection of data, it requires that your data is stored locally, with some exceptions, obviously, but most of the time it's locally. So if you go to a cloud, a clinical application provider, and which has an absolutely amazing application that will solve most of your problems, but you fail to check if legal compliance is adequate, and the protection of personal health information, such as not only the hosting of the health information, but also the access and the purpose in which the information is accessed, you may be in deep trouble later in regards to reportable data breach. And you have not even been cyber attacked. So that was just internal, someone internally or someone from this organization, particular organization, accessing the data without the need to do so. And this is beyond an external attacker. So information security starts within the organization. So when people start, asking the question, should we, I've been Googling around what to do to protect my data. And I said, I should start Googling within to see what's important for you and what makes your organization tick and what will take your organization forward or completely destroy your organization. So you have to really think extremes on that and find a middle ground for that. So that competitive environment is very good for innovation, but information security principles are not being carried at the same pace as innovative approaches. So we've got to be very careful when we're selecting suppliers and look into what their not only functional roadmap is, but also what is the maturity on information security frameworks and standards. And I know they're not going to solve all of the problems, but at least they will show that some people are interested in taking the next step to understand what they can do to be better. And obviously they are improving by necessity. The vendors, some of them are obviously, if you don't improve because you need to adapt to the modern world where information security is no longer an additional add-on, bells and whistles, is something it's quite essential today. So you're out of business. So you need to really look into those aspects, because I would personally, as a Chief Digital Health Officer, do not engage with organizations that do not have adopted a cybersecurity or information security framework, and they can actually demonstrate that they are serious about it. So it's quite important to do that. Are my colleagues in industry doing the same? I'll tell you, no, not all of them, but there's a massive number of chief information officers today that are moving towards that approach. Would that cost you more? It's a question I get all the time. If we engage with an organization that is, let's say, certified and have all of these frameworks in place, would that cost more? Well, it varies. It depends. It really depends what the risk that you're willing to take. And back to Greg's point around the risk assessment. So we can take calculated risks, and in healthcare, and that's the view that I promote is amongst my teams, is that we need to be agile. We can't be stuck in the past and have a program which is 18, 24 months to implement a new piece of innovation or technology when we can take calculated risks. Risk assessment for every decision that we make. Yes, are those decisions reversible? Are we going to cause harm to someone? We ask some really basic questions to speed up our innovative thinking, but we also, obviously, during that assessment, we consider all the information security and cybersecurity components. So organizations are starting to see that, because once you send a tender documentation out, we start answering questions from suppliers. One of the tabs on a statement of requirements is fully dedicated for information security and cybersecurity, just to understand a little bit more about the approach and the principles that organization follows. So finishing off, not many slides to go, but the healthcare digital ecosystem specifics. Obviously, there's very low investment in information security, but it's changing over time. So we've seen that is changing for various reasons. It might be political reasons. It depends who is in government at the time. It depends who wants to be on a spotlight. But I think there is a trend of increasing investment in healthcare more than ever. And it's getting better. It's not perfect, but we've got to be optimistic and look forward and see there's a chance there. But it's up to us, professionals, to be keeping promoting the word and pushing at C-level and any level within the organization. Biomedical devices, this is an amazing one. So biomedical devices coming on board and security in mind. So this is it's something it's quite interesting, because that is sitting, and that falls into the example, John, that you mentioned. The biomedical device is sitting behind the firewall. What do I do if I have a low information security maturity? It's not really my fault that someone has moved from one particular network to the network that the biomedical devices was connected, and someone actually got harmed because of it. So, well, there's always various sides of the story, but how about we think of this holistically? And until the biomedical devices really, manufacturers really understand and accept that biomedical devices are no different than a mobile phone today. They're no different than a laptop or a computer. And therefore, we need to apply the same principles. We hope, and we know that there's a lot of big players out there doing this today, and they are looking forward in improving their maturity. But we also know that there are some that are just very happy to be where they are as long as their application or products work, and they don't have to worry about anything else. I'll give an example of biomedical devices I wrote there is what I have seen. Amazing application and set of devices across health services, providing optimization of workflows, etc. But they were also transmitting unencrypted drug library files from infusion pumps. So what does that mean? So it means that it can be intercepted. What's the likelihood? We're not discussing risk assessment here today, but there is a chance. I'm not saying the probability is rare or almost certain, and the impact is low or catastrophic. But if we play a use case, a scenario here where that drug library provides the dosages for a particular device that's connected with the subject of interest, a celebrity or a government official, etc., and the hospital systems have been, defenses have been compromised, and access to manipulate that drug library file in transit is successful, we do have a possibility that something can go badly wrong here. So we have to think about those things. So when designing biomedical devices and applications, end-to-end security, as it operates on its own, do not believe that anyone else is going to be doing security for you. And that's a piece of advice I have for all biomedical devices out there. Because although the hospital is definitely responsible for the scope of works that they operate within, they are not responsible for the security within those devices or applications. So there will always be this game. But I would say to eliminate that, how about everybody takes their responsibility and move forward implementing better information security practice. So obviously, just to wrap it up here is clinicians and BYOD bring their own device, causing conflict, distress, ICT resources, very few information security professionals. And I just want to refer back to what Greg mentioned about certification and all of that. Yes, you can see a growing number of certified professionals out there, but the question is, has the maturity of their capability improved over time? And the answer is no. So you can see a lot of people with information security certifications with very little experience or real life experience, people who've never been involved in an instant. And that's where the value is, when you actually really hit in the face with one of these things, but you have the backing of formal education to be able to deliver a comprehensive approach to a containment strategy. And obviously, information security requirements are changing quite fast, and our goal is to be ahead, but we have to be realistic and pragmatic about how we do this. Risk management is the key here, is really assess risk regularly. People say, oh, once a month. I have risk assessment sessions every Friday, and I do risk assessment every day. And if I notice anything, I go and update the risk register, and I trigger activities to mitigate or at least reduce the risk profile. This is something that should be embedded on everyone's blood, not something that you deal with to take an audit, for example. So this is the final slide. So my piece of advice to people is like, what do? Do you think extremes? Well, you can think extremes. You can say, okay, I'm going to be very safe, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm not going to invent anything. I'm not going to be innovative. You can go that way. That's definitely the way that I don't go. So you can be ambitious in what you do too. You can include information security in those aspects when you're developing and writing your strategies or a new product information brochure, for example, to pitch a new product development. Just put information security as part of a program of change, and be considered and reasonable with the functional requirements of the end users. The security should be in the forefront of a lot of things, but it's not the only thing. So we also need to look into considerations around how information security affect departments that require agility and have specific functional requirements. I'll give an example: emergency departments. Try to make the life difficult for clinicians in an emergency department who are just trying to save lives pretty much right away, and present them with a screen to change the password when they are just trying to admit a patient and provide a diagnosis and look into history. You're going to lose them right there and then, if you're not losing actually a patient alive. So there's a lot of considerations to make. Educate stakeholders about that, about security. So these are the risks, and understand and be compassionate about it, and listen. So when you listen to people, it's amazing. You learn something every day. You learn a different perspective. That's what takes you from where you are today to where you want to be tomorrow. But without that different perspective, that different challenge, you get nowhere. So educate stakeholders and be prepared to have frank conversations, but be prepared to listen. And what I notice from a lot of information security professionals is that it's very one-sided. So we need to understand the whole picture. I'm very lucky. I have probably one of the best chief information security officers in the world, Grant Lockwood. And he's an absolutely exemplar on how to engage with the stakeholders and assess and implement information security programs that are sustainable, not only to uplift the maturity, but also to be sustainable. If one day he leaves the organization, that's sustainable, and it's a culture that he's changing, not only an information security program. So understand your risk profile. As I said, everything is a risk in your life. So risk assess the things that matter, those top 5 or 10. That would be never sleep soundly, because this will happen to you. It's not if it will happen, but when. Is a saying that's been around for some time, but it's never sleep soundly, because something will happen to you one day. And when it does happen, you have to ask your question. If you have done everything in the best of your ability to protect what you're being trusted to do, especially in healthcare, when someone's life may be at your hands. So thank you very much.
Thank you, George. That was brilliant. And Greg, your talk was awesome too, mate. I apologize. I was just focused on the time constraints and the questions and opening up the floor. So excellent, guys. Greg and George, my head's spinning. I can raise 10 questions, but I'll open up the floor. I did post a question around AI increasing the attack surface area, but I'm happy for the panel and for everyone who's joined today to ask their questions and go forward. So the floor is open to anyone who wants to ask a question, because we covered so much territory. We can tackle. It sounds like that you've got legacy systems that you haven't fully tested and you just whacked it into the cloud hoping for the best. But that's my 2 bobs worth. But anyway, I'll open the floor to everybody, and please raise your hands if we're over time. So it's up to Greg and George if they're prepared to hang around a little bit. But the floor is open to everyone to ask questions.
So George, I just put a note in there that I've got a stop in at 1:45. I've got something else on at that stage. Just a very quick comment on your question. So the cryptocurrency part doesn't actually connect, because the place where the cryptocurrency gets turned back into hard cash will be somewhere out beyond the jurisdiction of Australia. So there'll be no possibility of recovering that. But in terms of the attack surface, I haven't seen a study, but in the past I have suggested that while AI will solve some problems, it will also provide extra tools to the attackers. So on balance, it's the increase of the attack surface which is the biggest threat there. And as far as I kept on saying, and George, thanks for correcting me, I kept on saying 2016. I guess what I was thinking about in terms of the ransomware attack is if you take from 2016 to 2017 and then 2017 to 2018, 2018 to 2019, each year there's been the impact has been greater, which sort of and I really like the attention that you focused on that. I think that was really insightful.
That's good. No, thanks, Greg. And yeah, you know what? When I was watching your presentation, I actually Googled, I was like, did I get this wrong? and I was like, no, 13th of May. Okay, well, yes. But I got what you meant, because that was a process that actually started before 2017. So, and we all knew that was coming, and the awareness was before 2017. So, all right. So, George, just briefly, just a comment around AI. And the risk, obviously there. As Greg mentioned, anything that's smart is subject to something. So, and AI is no different. So AI operates on various different methods. There's just very different methods that we can have AI or machine learning and methodologies behind it. But all of them depend on one thing, which is data. So if the data is compromised, and you don't have a good training set for it, then obviously the output can be compromised. So there's some other considerations around that, but obviously is how do you do AI? Do you do that in-house? Do you do that via a third-party provider? Do you do that yourself but in the cloud? Do you use somebody else's service but yourself? Where is the data collected, stored, processed, and presented? And that's the very first question that I would ask for anyone doing AI. Do you know the care of custody, the chain of custody for your data when you're doing AI. And that's, if you don't know the answer to that question, you should consider if you're doing AI. You should be doing AI today. Is, do you know the chain of custody of your information when you're doing AI? Who is actually processing it? And that's a very important point. As the big players start developing more and more AI capability as microservices embedded into cloud offerings. And I'm talking about the very big providers today. They all have AI capability. So that data needs to be processed to somewhere. Where is that going? So is that part of understanding of your patients, of your customers or clients, however we call them? So we need to really assess those things before doing that. And guess what? If the information leaves your custody and control, yes, it can be subject to be exploited or leaked and breached.
The MRI example is one that is foremost in my mind in terms of, if you haven't done the equivalent in banks, what we do is penetration testing. Yeah. So we have these companies that come in and they're isolated from us. So they get to reverse engineer what we ever build. And I'm just curious, you know, with your data, you lose your data, you restore your data from your backup, you know, there's no real brand damage. But if you're running a surgery division within your hospital, and someone hijacks the equipment that the surgeons are using and people die, all of a sudden you've got a brand problem and you've got some huge lawsuits. And that's where I was kind of getting to, because the low-hanging fruit in terms of capturing your data and then trying to commercialize that through AI, it doesn't hurt a lot. With banks, if banks are compromised from a security perspective, they're destroyed. I mean, that's historical. You know, but with health institutions, that psychology, that expectation is still emerging, and it sounds like it's still the wild, wild west for some of this technology, which both you and Greg are implying in the way you're addressing the risk component to this. But I don't want to hog the speaking time. I'm sure the people who have joined today have got very pressing questions. Paul looks like he wants to ask a question there.
I think I was on mute there. Look, I think just a huge amount of discussion is really being taken place here, which is good to see. That I think it's maturing up a lot of the conversation. I think some of what George has just, I think, re-emphasised to me is the fact that the best you can do is be a sort of a fast follower in this game. You can't really get ahead of the pack. And just be aware that, you know, it's really all about resilience, I guess, is a take-out message to me, that prevention is really gone as a concept. But one thing that I don't think we've touched on terribly much, I think we just a little bits and bobs, has been the impact of the supply chain and protection of the supply chain. A little bit through perhaps IoT devices and so on, but I wonder whether George or Greg have got any maybe quick comment. I'm aware of the time around the supply chain issues.
Greg, you want to go? I've got some comments, but happy for you to go first, Fish.
So with the supply chain challenge, I don't think that is in your top 50 problems. So your Da Vinci robotic surgery device is more likely to kill somebody by accidentally returning to its first position rather than through hacking, and you're more likely to accidentally dump your patient records in the dumpster and stuff like that. So there's lots and lots of things to worry about before you think about advanced nation states.
6 months isn't up yet.
That's really interesting, because it's quite different from the defense side of things, where a lot of things have come through, you know, supply chain attacks for ransomware. So, okay, interesting.
Yeah, so so defense is different. Nation states have a reason to attack defense institutions in other countries. In the health space, I mean, apart from, if you believe the press, you know, maybe North Korea is trying to cover their shortfall in currency. But most countries aren't interested in attacking a domestic hospital in Melbourne, whereas criminals are, and criminals aren't going to corrupt the supply chain by magically inserting corrupted chips in a factory somewhere in China. Criminals are just going to fish someone's details, and it's much easier.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'll give my 2 cents on this one. So I definitely have a different lens than Greg on this, but I think this is a good forum for us to talk through. I see supply chain as important as the first organization that I deal with. Nowadays, it's very rare that you have one organization that will do it all for you, and that will rely on third parties to deliver components of their solution. So on that note, and on that basis, the information security requirements that we request as part of a statement of requirements to any vendor, they should be cascaded down to their supply chain. This is I'll give you basic examples here, like administrator accounts not to be used as a normal everyday account. So that's kind of a bare minimum thing, because if one of my vendors and suppliers do not have such a basic control in place, I'll be questioning if I should be conducting business with that organization. The reason for that is because if something does go wrong, it's very hard to detect to start with. And once you redetect that, it's hard to contain, because the containment relies within that supply chain. And therefore, you don't have a seat on the table on an instant response team. And to avoid that whole situation, let's create some very basic requirements for any vendor trying to provide products and services within an organization. And that's the principles I've been applying. Is if a vendor comes and presents a great product, tell me more about the components of your product and who you're actually sourcing those products from, and then what sort of a security, maturity, and capability they have, and how serious they are about it. We don't go into detail forensic examination of this, but we look into what they're doing in the sector, what sort of a level of investment they have, how they operate, latest audit reports or by organizations, to provide a level of comfort. And do I still sleep soundly? No. I know that one day someone is going to drop the ball and something bad is going to happen, really bad. But at least I know that I have ticked the boxes of things that I thought that I could do to at least prevent that situation to occurring on a regular basis.
So can I just add in there that I completely agree with George regarding third party and vendor risk. No question about it. The supply chain risk that I was referring to was the supply chain attack, where a malicious actor deliberately inserts malware via the supply chain. So I think we might be talking a little bit cross purposes.
Different aspect. That's why I said a different lens perspective on this. Yep.
George?
John.
Jorge, I was interested in your comment where you thought, because AI uses data, it's equally vulnerable. Our company has a serious investment in machine learning, supervised machine learning, in its products, and I struggle to understand what someone can do to interfere with the development of my machine learning models. In our case, it's NLP, so language models. I could understand them attacking the total installation and bringing it down. I could understand them attacking the total installation and reading database tables to get data out of it. But I can't, in my own mind, identify how they could corrupt the AI process itself. Do you have any further comments on that?
Yes, absolutely. This is a very good question, John, because I actually got this question not long ago, a few weeks ago, from one of our scientists. He said, well, once we have our machine learning, it's pretty much what we put in, and we expect to get something out. That's what we're going to get out. It's going to do some processing, and that's it. So the only variables here are actually if you put good data in, you get good outcomes out, outputs out. If you put rubbish data, you get rubbish data out. And I said, yes, that is if we know that the processing bit, the machine learning, is intact and it maintains its integrity. So an attack to the level obviously will be more sophisticated. It's not something that people will be doing on an everyday basis, but there is a possibility, a probability that someone with the right motive, I'm not defining what the motives would be, could change the algorithm in which your machine learning operates. So therefore, if you accept in the same input, your processing will be compromised. Therefore, your output for that machine learning will be compromised as well. And that's usually how.
So what they'd have to do is they'd have to get into our code base.
Mm-hmm.
They'd have to insert something in our code base that disrupted the pipeline of processing. And they could do that either at the development stage, so they could come into our host machines in our own premises and change our training pipeline, and or get into, well, it's executable code by the time it gets installed in a client side. Mm-hmm. So they'd have to be able to interfere with executable code, which would mean a much higher level of competency.
Yes,
to do that.
Definitely, compiled code is a whole new game.
Yeah.
You would have to completely reverse engineer the thing out of it. There's not many people out there who can actually do that, have the time, budget, and
the motivation.
And the motivation.
Yeah.
So on that basis, obviously, the probability may be really unlikely, I would say. It's not rare, or it could even be rare. But the consequences that happens, it can be quite catastrophic for your organization. So, and when I mentioned before, understanding the 5 or 10 things for you to protect, and these would definitely be one of the things in your list, John.
Yeah.
It's understanding what are the points of entry that attackers can gain access to.
George, have we run out of time? Jorge is frozen.
George's connection may have dropped out at his end.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's time to call it. I can write to him separately. Thanks for running the workshop, George. It's been really useful.
I'm happy that you got something out of it. I hope everyone got something out of it. As we end and close this panel discussion, please fill out the survey if you can and just give us some feedback. That'd be awesome.
Okay.
Right. Thank you very much. Okay. Bye-bye.